All right, well, here we are. It's that time of day again, and we're going to jump into our hot topic of RF today. Seems like RF is, we were chatting earlier that it's one of the just, everybody loves to talk RF. Maybe there's some magic going on. Maybe there's, it's that invisible thing, the same way that we've tried to get our head around the science of COVID and social distancing and all those kind of things. I think RF's kind of like that, Mac. One of the things is when people are like, I can't see it, but yet it plays such a big part of my life, right? And RF is very much that, where we are, it's completely necessary. So I'm gonna let Pete and Mac talk for just a little bit here about Q&A, because this topic's gonna have a lot of it. And let's see where we want to go here. So Mac, why don't you tell us a little about how you've used IAS in the past, and then how Q&A is going to work. We're letting some more people join us.
Well, I've been using it for a long time, and pretty much on every event that I'm involved with, because we can't do the smallest little event anymore that doesn't involve wireless mics in some capacity. It's just too important to miss. It's the lifeline to every show we do, and IAS is what I use because it's what I started using a long time ago. I'm not the person actually controlling the teching the microphones, so I never actually learned how to use Wireless Workbench to manage all my Shure mics, because there was an A2 for that, and I would expect any A2 to be fluent in that. But I'm fluent in I'm relatively fluent in IAS, and very happy to use it because I find it very straightforward and clear in what you're doing. So there will be questions that come up. This is going to be a pretty comprehensive discussion. In the control panel on the side of your screen, Pete always describes it as being on the right, and on mine it's always been on the left, so I don't know what yours are. But in that control panel, there will be a little pull down arrow that will open up the questions tab. And in that, you'll be able to type in any questions you have. And we will not be able to get to everyone's questions, but we will get to as many as we can. And we, if your question, if we don't respond to you directly, we may be responding to someone else who asks the same question. But we will get to as many questions and certainly try to cover as many topics as possible. Pete?
I too live and die by IAS, as it were. 35 years ago, I wrote a basic program to do third order coordination when I first started out in doing wireless mics. And it worked for what I needed, but obviously it was only your very basic use. It didn't have any of the triple beats or anything like that. So I use it all the time. I have it on my main and my backup computer. If I didn't have it, if one of my computers goes down, I'm out of luck. I can't do it. I mean, I could obviously look in the manufacturer's list of wireless and pick a group and channels out and maybe make just the mics work. But it really, if I got all different kinds of other stuff, it's the only way to go. Why don't you just go ahead, and Gary, and take it away.
Right. Yeah, Gary and Loren and Cody are here representing IAS today, and we're going to start with Gary Trenda.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, and thanks for having us on to talk about this. We get, quite a bit of time to talk about IAS within the, folks that do IAS support here, but it's good to do just kind of a general overview of frequency coordination and how IAS kind of fits into that. So as the guys said, we've got Loren Sherman on the call today, who's a frequency coordinator for CP Communications. And then you got myself and Cody, who both work for PWS. So what are we going to talk about in the webinar today? we're going to start with your pre-production. So what are you able to do maybe before you get to your event site? How can you start your coordination remotely? And then what do you want to do once you get to your show site? What's the best way to do your site survey and all the other things that happen once you get there? We're going to have some time for live demos. So Cody's going to go through just sort of basics of the IAS software. You know, what's the file menu got? You know, what are your different ribbon options have? Where do you set all these different intermod bypass windows and other settings that you may or may not have even seen, depending on how familiar you are with the software. And Loren's actually going to run us through a live demo of a coordination, just kind of start from scratch. What do I need to do to build my equipment inventory, bring in a scan, figure out some specifics about my show site, and how do I add in my different wireless devices. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is intermodulation. I mean, the software is IAS, right? Intermodulation Analysis System. And so we're doing a lot of math and a lot of calculations. And what are those calculations really, and how do they impact reliable operation of your wireless systems? We want to get you kind of comfortable with when do you want to modify your coordination settings? Where are those settings within the software? And then we'll again look through that real world coordination and ask some questions as we go. And we'll try and have a little bit additional time for Q&A at the end, particularly for anything that's a little more of a deep dive question. We're going to try and get those to the end because today we're trying to get you through a basic build a coordination and any questions that relate to that. So let's talk a little bit about pre-production. So if you're thinking about pre-production, you've been hired to do either frequency coordination for an event, or maybe you're the RF tech at an event and you're bringing in some wireless equipment. You want to think about who's involved with that event and what equipment are people expecting to use, both the equipment that you're providing or equipment that you're coordinating and anything else that might be in the local area. And a lot of times, some of this pre-production work really makes your work on site go a lot smoother. If you are able to reach out ahead of time to, depending on the type of event, maybe you've got an ops manager, a tech manager. If you're coordinating a festival, maybe there's a bunch of band technicians that are all going to be bringing in equipment throughout the day. If you're doing a corporate event, maybe there's a rental provider or a number of rental providers who are bringing equipment into various keynotes and breakout rooms. And in any of these facilities, you know, you're going into an arena. What do they have in the arena already? Are they expecting to use their in-house equipment for the event? Do you need to reach out to in-house tech staff for that? So you kind of want to just gather as much of that information as you can before you start your event. And then once you know some of that, you can decide, is there equipment, like perhaps in-house equipment, that just needs to stay on its frequency where it's assigned right now? Do I have the ability to assign new frequencies to that, or other equipment that's coming in? Do I have ability to assign frequencies there? You also want to think about what frequency ranges are available to you. If you do this far enough ahead of time, maybe you've got the ability to reach out to a rental provider and say, hey, you said you want 12 wireless microphones. What band splits do you have available in your rental inventory for this event? Because you as the coordinator will probably have a good idea, or maybe a better idea than the rental provider even, of what the most appropriate band split would be for that location. And then once you get to site, what are some of your best practices once you're on site? You know, do you have the ability to do a site survey beforehand or when you get to site? And in any case, and we've been stressing this, I think, over a lot of the talks we've been doing about frequency coordination recently, site survey is your best option. Like, you can get online database information about a site, but when you're standing there at the venue and you're taking a scan with your spectrum analyzer, that's the most accurate data you can have to get a good start to your coordination. But let's say you can't go to the site. What can you do to get scan data another way? Pete's got a great website at his Best Audio site that's got scan data from a number of different venues. You might be able to reach out to someone at the venue, like a technical director, if they've got existing data about the local RF environment. Or sometimes I like to use my phone a friend option, right? If there's someone else that's been in that area recently, ideally that venue, maybe they've got a scan that they can share with me that'll help me get a jump start on my coordination. So basic ways to search and scan your RF environment. Obviously, spectrum analyzer is the best way to do it usually, but if you've got a wireless mic receiver, a number of wireless mic receivers with the software that the manufacturers provide have the ability to do scans. It's typically just a scan of the tuning bandwidth of that receiver, but still that's far better than no information about your local environment at all. So if you don't have a spectrum analyzer, try scanning with your receiver. And then once you get that scan specific to the IAS software we're talking about today, if you can export scan data into a CSV file to import into IAS, that'll allow you to view your scan data along with your coordination data. And Cody and Loren are going to talk a bit more about that later. So at the end of the day, with all our pre-production, really what we're trying to decide is who's broadcasting in proximity to my venue? Who else is on the air? Is there broadcast TV? Are there in-house frequencies? Is there maybe a T-band radio user? Who else is there so I can avoid any potential interfering frequencies and make my equipment run as reliably as possible? We talked in the webinar last week a bit about band planning in general, who's where in the RF spectrum, and we're going to spin through just a little bit of that again in case some folks are new with this webinar. Here's a graphic of the 600 megahertz incentive auction that has happened and the repack that we're just about complete with right now. It just shows you how UHF TV band has repacked down into TV 14 through TV 36, where that used to go up to 52. So that means that everything above 608 is no longer broadcast television. And so we've got other folks operating up there. You probably hear a lot about T-Mobile operating up there because T-Mobile is one of the major winners of the auction. And this shows uplink and downlink bands that are now operational in the 600 meg band. This also shows a couple of areas where we are still allowed to use wireless equipment, wireless microphones in your monitors, etc., and a couple of small guard band and duplex gap areas. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, here's the timeline for the repack. What you can see here, we're scheduled to be completed with everything by July 3rd of this year. So at this point, anything you're expecting to deploy for wireless systems, you're going to want to make sure that you're operating outside of 600 meg with those couple exceptions that we mentioned a minute ago. And cellular band 71, if you hear people talking about that, cellular band 71 is this 600 megahertz band. And this is where we're giving you an example here of a T-Mobile spreadsheet that they make available at their How Mobile Works website. We've got the link down there on the slides. Make sure you've downloaded the slides if you haven't. We've got them available right in the GoToWebinar. And later on, when we're doing live demos, the slides are going to have some outlines on them of what the live demo is covering. So it could be helpful to follow along with that. But this one's showing you what T-Mobile's doing in some particular markets. This is a list of some other winners of the auction. So if you hear about cellular band 71, that's what people are talking about. And T-band channels was something we've talked about as well. Two-way radio is allowed to operate in the lower end of UHF digital television. So 470 to 512 megahertz, TV channels 14 through 20. A lot of these T-band radios are for public safety. And so we've got a list here showing you some major markets that do use T-band radio for public safety. And you can see it's not all of that 470 to 512 spectrum, but it's specific channels in specific markets. So let's say I was doing an event in Chicago. I need to avoid TV 14 and 15, not because there's a broadcast television channel on 14 and 15, but because of this T-band radio that's there. So you still need to exclude it from your coordination. And just another one of those areas to be aware of as you're thinking about the RF spectrum. Here's your list of available spectrum post-auction that we're seeing wireless devices at events using. This is kind of your common bands where, as a frequency coordinator, you might have people requesting frequencies or wanting to place equipment in there. A couple of highlights here is these, guard band and gap, the 614 to 616, 653 to 663. Those are some areas that you're maybe not used to operating in specifically, but are going to become, I think, more used in the future. Also, we've been highlighting this STL band since people, I think, are more familiar with STL band equipment now, and some manufacturers are selling more STL band equipment. We want to stress that this is licensed use only, so you have to be a Part 74 license holder and have that frequency band as part of your license to be able to use it. Aft-jack band is something that kind of should be around the corner. We expect manufacturers to be using that band or offering equipment in that band because of some changes in the rules in recent years that are going to allow expanded use of that for devices like wireless microphones. Deck band we talked about a little bit with wireless intercom last time we went through this, and of course your unlicensed ISM bands, industrial, scientific, and medical, like 902 to 928. A lot of people, you'll hear that called the 900 ISM band, or the 2.4 gig where you've got Wi-Fi and other devices. Putting that all together, once you understand the spectrum that you're able to operate in, you might want to think about your RF band plan for where you're going to place devices. A lot of times, if you've got the available spectrum to do it, it's a good idea to segregate out your wireless mics from your wireless in your monitors or IFBs. So this is an example band plan. So let's say you have this available spectrum in your venue. How do I want to divide this up, and what devices do I want to put in what particular chunks of spectrum? And Loren will talk a little bit more about that as he's going through the live demo where he's going to be placing mics and IFBs and making sure he's got some separation between those systems. Cody, what do we have coming in for questions about that so far?
So far, so good. We've been right on. The only thing that's really kind of come up was we are actually welcoming questions. I think there was some misunderstanding there. We just might pass over a lot that we know are either going to come up when Loren is doing the coordination. But we are actually going to be taking questions through this too if they're relatable to what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, send us your questions. We want to make sure to get through some frequency coordination basics and address questions related to that. And then if we've got some more involved questions, we'll try and get to those at the end.
Two quick ones on spectrum, it looks like.
Okay.
What is happening in the 608 to 614 megahertz?
Okay. So
what is happening?
That was
see.
missing from your list of bands, channel 37.
Yeah, so that channel 37 is reserved for radio astronomy, and that's been true even before this repack. And so we've, never really been able to operate systems in there because of radio astronomy, and also there's some medical telemetry equipment that operates there. So that 6 meg chunk of spectrum is reserved for other users.
Great. And then how wide is the 1.4 gig AVTRAC band?
I think it's about 90 meg total. It goes from 1435 to 1525. Don't quote me, but I think that's true. So it's a pretty decent chunk. Like it's it depends on the event that you're at, whether or not that 90 meg is going to be real appealing to you. It has been used in the past a lot for wireless video, and of course, wireless video links are fairly bandwidth intensive. And so if you're at a large broadcast type event that's got a lot of wireless video, you might not have a bunch of empty space there for your mics. There are some different rules for operating an AVTRAC band that we'll end up talking about when the equipment is available to operate there, but essentially a single user won't be allowed to use all 90 meg of that. They're going to be able to use a small portion of it. I believe it's 30 meg or so. I'm sure Henry and other folks will correct me if I don't have that right, but yeah, it's something that's coming. I mean, we're going to be able to use more devices there, and I think people are going to move there just because of the congestion in the UHF TV band now after this, really what's second repacking of UHF TV band.
Fantastic. And then I think that's it for right now. So.
All right. So from there, we're going on to Cody and your discussion, right?
Cody, were you going to do some slides or not?
Yeah, there's a couple slides that I was going to do. So if we can throw Gary's back up
Yeah,
here.
you can stay with the slide deck
Okay.
for that. Yeah.
So basically what I'm going to cover here is just kind of the very basics of IAS, just the navigation through it, trying to figure out some of the lingo with it, what it does, and then we're going to really hop into the meat of it with Loren and Gary. Gary's going to kind of go through Intermod and what it is and how to kind of modify that stuff within your coordination. And then we're going to jump to Loren, and he's really going to dive deep into how to coordinate, go through a full coordination, some real world examples, and places that he's been. So what is IAS? It is Intermodulation Analysis System. Some of the key features of IAS, links to the FCC's database to exclude active TV licenses and public safety. So you can kind of use that as a starting point for your coordination and have that to kind of take the beginning information from. You can download scans from other users. So within IAS, and we'll show an example of this, there is an area where you can actually take some scans that have been uploaded into the IAS server, and you can use those. And Gary also talked about Pete's infamous best audio database as well, that you can get scans from there. So you've got 2 different ways to kind of get your pre-coordination options if you can't be on site to take your own scan. Another thing we've got is when you import your scan, it visually displays along with your TV information. Obviously, it calculates intermods, organizes frequency assignment. So we'll go into that, meaning you can separate things by zones, you can name it all, and just a really nice organizational aspect to IAS. And then also there's a demo available. Hopefully everyone that's on this has the software, and it is available at the link below, professionalwireless.com/frequency-coordination-software. So moving on to our next slide here, we're going to talk about just kind of the frequently asked questions, some things that Gary and myself answer quite a bit in the support chain. Any issues or challenges with IAS that you have, you can get to us at support@professionalwireless.com. But these are the 3 big ones. So effective this month in April 2020, our current version is 5.0.14. And again, you can get that professionalwireless.com. And the frequency coordination. The IAS license portal is something that we get a lot of questions about. A lot of people don't really know how powerful this portion of it is for your software. You can reset your licenses on here. You can change your user info, manage your license, and upgrade your license as well. So that link that you see in the slide there, if you've downloaded these slides, you can use that link to get there. But you just need to have your license info, and once you're inside of that, there are a couple things once you print your preview for your coordination that you can only change within the portal. So that's one reason why it's very helpful. And then if you're a large company, or if you're got a multi-user setup for IAS and you need to keep moving machines, you can also manage your licenses for those machines through that portal. So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that, knows how to get to that. And again, if you have any issues there, please just reach out to us and we will help you get through that. And then lastly, one of the big ones is if you are in a virtual machine. So if you're using IAS on a Mac through a virtual machine, a lot of the times Windows will download IAS as a .exe, and you want to just simply rename that to a .msi, and then your application will be able to run. So just yet a few things that we run into in the support realm of things, and hopefully that kind of helps get you started. So now we're going to get closer to jumping in. Just a quick overview. We're going to do some menu structure, just kind of show you the spectrum graph, how to manipulate it, how things work. Your active spectrum, yet again, how to kind of modify and manipulate that. And then the TV wizard that we've been talking so much about. So at this point, we're going to dive in here, and I'm going to go live onto my screen. And hopefully we are seeing my IAS, and I think we are. So when you first open IAS, this is just a blank slate that you'll kind of be dealing with. If you've never opened IAS before, it looks a little different than other programs out there. So we're going to get just a little involved here. In the very center section where you see 0 candidates, this is kind of going to be where all your frequencies are compiled when you request them. On the left-hand side here in this white box where you see untitled TV station, zone 1 and unassigned, this is where your coordination will take place. You'll add, subtract zones, add, subtract frequencies through here. And this is kind of the heart and soul of your coordination. At the bottom, you're going to see our graph. So this graph is where you'll see available spectrum, what DTV you're using or not using, what frequencies you have available to you, and all that. So we'll dive in there. One thing to note, you've got your UHF spectrum to the right of this, and then your VHF spectrum to the left. And you can just slide this back and forth to be able to utilize that to your liking. Same thing with the vertical axis here. You can move that up and down. So we're going to start with the TV wizard up here on the left. So this is where we're going to kind of start our coordinations at. You've got a few options in here. So we're looking at the United States. Previously downloaded. So if you've never downloaded anything, you're going to want to do this if it's your first time with the software, or if it's just simply been a while. This will let you know when you downloaded. I downloaded today to make sure we were ready for this. But if not, you would have just this download data file button right here. So you'd click that, it would download the most recent. Only takes a second or two. You do have to have internet access to access this. So just making sure you've got that covered. We're going to hit next. And in this area, you're going to specify now where you're at. So you have a couple options. You can do this by zip code, or you can do this by latitude and longitude. I like to do this by latitude and longitude just because it stays a bit more specific. But for today, we're going to go ahead and just do it by zip code. So type in your zip code. It shows your location. I like to actually make this a bit more specific as well. So today we are working at Bridgestone Arena, and there's our zip code, and it is auto added our latitude and longitude. So we're going to search for that. It's going to compile all of our FCC information. So this list now shows you everything within your area, what it's going to omit and what it's going to take into consideration. A few different things here. You've got your license status, your call signs, what city, maybe if it's a neighboring city or state sometimes, and your power level. So you're going to take a look at all that information. For the most part, you're just going to take that the way it is and bring it in, unless you've really done your homework and you know of something that is maybe a little different from that. You also have, like we were talking about on the server option, RF sweep set data sets. So if you click this, this will then compile a list of frequencies, a list of sweeps that have been done in the area based on that zip code. And you can kind of find your most recent one. So for here, we've got one in October of 19. So we're going to just go ahead and use that. So we click it, and this will give you just a bit of information on that, what it was taken with and where it was taken at. We'll accept that and download. Now you'll notice that kind of compiles that down into our bottom window here. So we now have our scan into our spectrum window, and now with clicking import, we're going to import all of our FCC data into this window as well. So now we've got a few things going on here. We have our scan plus our FCC data. There's a few different things that are either conflicting or some things that we want to kind of work on and change here. So one thing that we're going to first notice is that there is some conflicting data with our scan than what is with our FCC data. So for lack of argument in this webinar, we're taking a scan from probably pre-repack and FCC data that is hopefully current in our repack. So this is going to be a little conflicting, but if you have both that are current, it's still a very good possibility that you're going to have some conflicting data. So we've got a DTV station right here in channel 28. Hopefully you can see my mouse on this. So if you want to go ahead and omit that, all these yellow bars, again, are these stations that we've imported, which the coordination will omit. It will not allow that to be involved while it's doing its calculations. So obviously some of these other ones that are coming up, we want to omit. Simply right click that, and then you have set as digital TV right here. So we're going to click that, and now that is added to our station list right here, and it will be omitted from our coordination. So we've got a few more of these that we're going to do. Setting these. I like to keep my coordinations pretty strict for the beginning of things, so I might omit just a little more than I should. But then we'll notice we've got one here that has a low noise floor, and we have that set as a DTV station. So this might be something that later in the day you want to rescan, check that again. Maybe there is information on there later. Maybe it's something that's not being, you might not be able to see it inside. And so we may or may not want to utilize that depending on our situation. So for this, we're going to go ahead and allow that into our coordination. So same aspect, you right click and you will just click set as DTV or uncheck set as DTV. So that gets us through that portion of it. One other thing we kind of want to take a look at, there is a rubber band or a zoom feature within IAS. So it's just the typical click and drag of your mouse. We're going to kind of look at our uplink of our cellular blocks over here. So we've got A through G and then our duplex gap and then A through G of the uplink. So on our downlink over here, we're going to zoom in on that just a little bit. So I'm just clicking and dragging and now it's zoomed in on this portion. We want to omit the cellular blocks C and D because in Davidson County, where we're at Nashville, these are occupied. So instead of doing digital TV, we're going to go ahead and set our cellular block C on. So that just omits this without omitting the entire 6 meg chunk. So set cellular block D. One thing we're going to notice here now is this is a DTV station crossing over 2 different cellular blocks. So we wouldn't do that with E. We wouldn't necessarily set that as a cellular block if we don't want to. What I'm going to do here is actually set that as digital TV. So that's going to omit across that E and F block. So anything that we do on the downlink is also going to be shown on the uplink. So we can right click and this will unzoom and bring us back to our default view. And we'll notice over here, C and D have been mirrored for what we have on the C and D blocks over here. Now our digital TV didn't do that because that is spectrum wide or per channel where the cellular blocks are gonna mirror to one another. So we've kind of started our coordination basics here. So we've got our spectrum ready to go. Now we're going to go ahead and start working on our inventory. So up here, you've got make, model, and range. So we're going to just kind of look at something basic for now. Start with some of my transmits, which would be a part of my band plan that I've come up with. So make sure our model, we're going to look at PSM 1000s, and then I want to work in the J8 range. So you've seen now that once we've clicked PSM 1000, it's going to auto-populate the bands and what part of the spectrums they cover. So our G10 is going to be 470 to 542, and you can keep going on from there. So we're going to be working in the J8 range, and we're going to try to calculate some frequencies there. So now that we've done this, you have either single or range, so we can select a specific frequency, maybe if we're trying to look for something that someone wants us to use. Or if we're just trying to fit something into a specific spot, we can use single and just try to generate that. The other option is range here, where this is going to generate everything that IAS will be able to find for us based on these parameters that we currently have. Next step would be to calculate. And now we would have our 19 candidates that would be able to be appropriate for this coordination. We're going to zoom in, kind of look at what area of the spectrum that we want to use here. So for now, we're going to use 560s and 561. When you select these, you've got a couple options. You can right click and you can just move the items or the frequencies you've selected to move over into your coordination. You can move all items. So if you needed 14 frequencies and you thought those 14 were appropriate, you can move all of them at once. So say if I were to do that, now you notice that they have gone into my coordination. Say that was something I didn't want to do, I could just simply right click that assignment and remove it, and then we're back to square one again. So I'm going to use these 2 frequencies. I'm going to move them over to my coordination, and you have under zone 1 each tab. So you can, this is currently unassigned. We're going to call this PSM 1000, and I'm going to label it J8. How you label these 2, we'll just do a very quick overview of the preview window once our coordination's done. This translates into that, so it kind of depends on what you want your client or your vendors to see. So it's how you label these. So sometimes if you've got E&G crews in there, like Pete was mentioning, you can put their phone number in here. You can label the band, so maybe it's easier to identify that way, but just kind of comes to personal preference there. So now it's auto-populated another assignment for us here, and we could add another piece of inventory to that next section. So that's just kind of the very basics of calculating a frequency and adding it into your coordination. something we want to take a look at real quick now is in our print preview window. So we've been through most of this ribbon here in the home page. If we click print preview, this will auto-populate now. That's going to be hard to see. So this is our coordination report. It's got my name, show name, which is currently untitled, and I'm going to go through that in a second. There's 2 frequencies listed. We'd have some information right here, and then what TV stations we have decided to put towards our coordination, and then lastly, our frequencies that are involved in our coordination. So that's just kind of the basics of what we're going to do here. You'll notice the way we named it now. If that translates, which what I'm highlighting, so that PSM 1000J8 that I titled that group of channels is now going to be right here. And so just to kind of see how that works. This also has your information at the bottom, which is also editable. So you can change that if you don't want people to have that information, or you can add more to that, whatever you choose to do. But this is just a brief overview of what our coordination report will look like. So let's dive into changing just a couple of those things. So from our home page here at the top, we've now moved over one to our edit page. On this side of things, we have our customer info tab right here. So we'll click that. Now we have a show name that we're going to do for this. So we're going to call this Pete's Awesome Show. And the customer name is Pete. Our point of contact will be Mac. His phone number, I would choose, you probably not call him, it's 911, pete@mac.com, and show notes, coordinated in Nashville. So all this information, again, we just want to keep in mind that this is the stuff that we're going to use to send out to our vendors, to our clients, and all that, to be able to just kind of compile a basic list of information in our reports. We're going to go ahead and accept that. Now, if we click our print preview, we have some information up here. We've got our show name, we've got our customer, a point of contact, a phone number, and an email address for that person. So some people decide to use that as the coordinator's information, even though you have it near the bottom. If you have a coordination with hundreds of frequencies, it's easier just to see it at the top. Some people like to use that as the technical director, so it can be funneled through them to the RF coordinator. Again, just kind of depends on personal preference there. One thing that we cannot modify within IAS, we have under File here, and if you click License, this is just basic information about our license. You'll notice that I can highlight everything, my first name, my last name, my address, my email, and my phone number. These are all things that we can edit right here. Click OK, and this will show up in our frequency report. One thing you can't modify from right here is the company name. What you would do is modify that within your portal, and then next time you opened IAS, you would just refresh your license and it would show up here. So that's just was mainly utilized for companies that were doing multi-site or multi-computer licensing. So just a quick thing right there. If you are new to the system and you're going from a demo version to a paid, you would also use this window to activate your license. You can do that manually or online. And those are, once you click that and run through that, they're pretty self-explanatory. You also have the option to deactivate your software right here. So if you were going to move your license to another computer, again, that's available through the portal, but you could do the same thing within the software at this point. So that's just a couple basics about how to get into your coordination, how to start things, and then printing your report and modifying the information within your report. The only other couple things I'm going to cover here before I send it over back to Gary and Loren to kind of start the meat of this is just kind of where a few of these things that you're going to see Loren utilizing a lot are, and just kind of the lingo of this so he doesn't have to stop and explain it. So we have our graph.
Cody.
Yes, sir.
So before you get into that, we've got a couple of questions coming in about the different scan data that you've been pulling up.
Okay.
I think I can get a couple of them quick, and then I'll have you go through one or two of them.
Sure.
We've got our friend Pasi from Finland, who mentioned that he's got a database online at rfscans.com. Gotham Sound
Fantastic.
also has one at gothamscans.com. We've talked a lot about, having some sort of open source database sharing, and so that's something maybe we should get together with Pete and the other folks that run these websites and see if we can share data between IAS and the various websites.
Absolutely.
In the future. We've got some questions about the TV database scan that you showed. So if you can bring up the TV wizard.
Sure.
The question was related to, there's a couple of questions about this, but basically, where do we have scan data available where we can pull from the countries like FCC database or, in Canada, Australia, their databases, versus what do you do if you're in Europe or in the Middle East or other places? And I think, the answer to that is those are the three areas that you're showing that we can pull from an online database, and other areas you're going to need to rely on an RF scan that you're able to bring into the software to figure out what TV is broadcasting in your local area. And then could you talk a little bit, and I know Loren will get into this a bit more later, but could you talk a little bit about active spectrum?
Sure, yeah. So as far as active spectrum in our coordination, so say you've got a portion of your spectrum that you don't want to be utilized that's a different size than maybe your DTV right here, where we want to get rid of that 6 meg chunk. So if you have a section that you don't want to have a part of your coordination, down here, and I'm actually going to make this a little bigger, in our window, we can right click pretty much anywhere, and we'll have this option that says edit active spectrum. So it's our third option down. When we click that, we have the ability here now to kind of omit certain sections. So there's some preset ones that are already in your IAS that you can utilize or deny. If you want to make your own though, and basically say like, here's a 3 meg chunk that looks dangerous or that I don't want to use, or I want to make sure everything stays away from that until a certain portion, you can do that. So what we'll do is we'll call this bad. We'll deny this range, and we want to make this, let's go ahead and do this one. We're going to start it. Let's just do, so 500 to 502 is an area that now I want to make sure is omitted from my coordination until I either allow that back in or just keep that out for my entire coordination. So we'll go ahead and add that into our list here. And now at the bottom, we have this bad. So if you wanted to bring that back into your scan or your coordination, you would just simply uncheck it. But here we're going to check it. We're going to bring that in. And now we see this 2 meg chunk that is going to be completely omitted from our coordination and anything that we want to have utilized in that. Now, if we want to allow it back in, we're going to hit OK, and that 2 meg chunk goes away.
Yeah, point being, you're defining your active spectrum there. And then if you want to make it an exclusion rather than active spectrum, you can just click that deny option.
Correct. Was there any other questions we want to?
Let's see. So someone asked, how is Pete able to run IAS on his Mac so it integrates well into the OS? I think he's using the Parallels software using coherence mode.
Yeah, I use Parallels in coherence, which basically totally hides the PC from me, and it runs flawlessly as if it were a Mac program.
Yeah, there are some questions about the scan data and the updates. To get the latest FCC data, you do need to be online to get that. To access the online repository of scans, you also need to be online. But for devices within the software, you don't need to be online. Those models are built into the software to get all the manufacturer make model data.
Correct. With your original download of the software, it adds all of these, the makes and models that we have in there currently.
Right. Yeah, the questions also about activations. What if my machine is stolen? Just email support and we can walk you through what to do to get a fresh activation. And then let's see, I think that's good for now. We'll
Okay.
get you through the rest of it and I'll get the last couple questions cleaned up.
Yeah, I was pretty much nearing the end, just kind of touching on some of this stuff. So we covered basically the company name having to be changed through your portal to show up in your coordination report. And then just a couple other options that you have in this edit tab. So Loren's going to show a real-time example of this, but importing your RF sweep data, or I'm sorry, importing a zone. So if you are, let's say, working on a tour and you have 20 shows, and say 6 of those are going to have a specific opening act or a specific DJ or something, and the rest of them aren't going to have it, you could take your zone that you coordinated for that band or DJ or act or whatever, export that and save that for next time. So when you're starting that coordination for that next show that you have that act or person or whatever, you could just re-import that zone and then just force the coordination to re-coordinate that. So that's what this button's for. Importing RF sweep data is where a lot of you are going to be utilizing. So say you didn't want to utilize a scan that was in the database. On this import RF sweep data tab, you've got a couple different options. You can clear your RF sweep data, which would just take away everything that you see on the graph right now, other than the only thing it would take away is your scan data. It would keep all your DTV, it would keep your frequencies, everything there. It would just get rid of that scan. Or you could import your RF sweep data. So I've got a couple different shows, but you would basically just click a CSV. You would say where that CSV was from, and then you would go ahead and import that, and it would show up on your graph here. You can have more than one. It does tend to look a little crazy, but you can generally differentiate between the two. I generally like to do that. Maybe if I've got a beginning of the day scan and an end of the day scan, just to see what's changed a little bit, maybe an indoor versus an outdoor scan, kind of what I want to be aware of, something that's might be close in the area. When you go ahead and clear that though, do this, notice that all went away. If I would have 2 scans in there, it would clear both of those scans, and you would have to re-import whichever one you wanted to bring back into that scan. That's what that does.
Show them how to clear the products on the right-hand side, so all of the channels appear and from your last coordination.
So everything.
Right-click on the section above. Yeah, clear candidate.
Were you just talking to clean this up, basically?
There's that, and then if you wanted to see it without the J8 stuff on the screen,
then you can just click your generic, and then that cleans this whole thing up.
Right.
So you've got it, as you guys have seen, it can get very chaotic in that window very easily. So there's just a few different ways to kind of clean things up and make it not look as, chaotic for you. So there's a few of the graphical things that we were going to talk through. Other than that, you have this tab that's user-defined models. If there's something that is not within the make and model that we have with IAS, once you've downloaded it, we can talk to support, and we can potentially help you make a model for it, or if you know the specs to your gear, you can also do that and build your own model, and then that would be accessed through there. We talked about customer info, and then editing active spectrum would be the same thing as when I right click down here. You also have the option up top here to do that. So the only other things we have within IAS is your view window. You can show or hide the graph, which you probably want to keep that up. And then Gary's going to talk about a couple other things here now. I'm going to pass over to him, but he's going to kind of go over this list of models tab. And we're also going to get really deep into the options window here for your kind of changing your intermod settings. So Gary, at that, I will let you take over from there.
Okay, thanks, we're back. Yeah, just cleaning up a couple of questions that came through. I think you covered some of them about how do we update the software? How often are the models updated? How do you build your own model? We'll talk about user-defined models a little bit. There's an option within the software to just check for updates to see if there's a new version, and with those new versions or when the model updates would happen. So we're going to talk just a little bit about intermodulation, since this is what the software is calculating. Let's We're not going to do too deep a dive on this because we could spend a significant amount of time, but what do you want to know about intermodulation as it relates to IAS? So what are intermod products and which ones are significant? And we've got an example here where, let's say we've just got two microphones, right? We've got, let's say these are traditional FM analog microphones, and they're set up at 500 megahertz and 501 megahertz. So intermodulation products are people call these IM, IMD. This is created as those two transmitters, in this case, two microphones, get close to each other. So proximity is a major driver of how strong an intermod product is. And you can see that from the graph here, that as we've got these two microphones separated by 8 feet, you're going to see a small third order intermod product. And then as you get them closer to each other, you might see a stronger third order intermod product. So what's going on here? Well, that is a third order intermod product. And if you want to know more about this, see my little bullet note at the end here. Shure's got a great publication called Selection and Operation of Wireless Microphone Systems. It's by Tim Veer, who's one of their applications engineers. He's got a whole appendix in there that goes through all the different orders of intermod products and all of the different calculations involved, which ones are significant and which ones are not as significant. So you can dig into that if you'd like. For the purposes of what we're talking about today, we're just going to say that what we mainly care about is third and fifth order intermod products with 2 and 3 transmitters when it comes to third order products. So this is an example of a 2 transmitter third order intermod product. So where do those 2 intermod products come from? Well, it's just a mathematical calculation where you're taking, in this case, your one intermod product is 2 times the first frequency minus the second, and the other one is 2 times the second frequency minus the first. So what we're expecting for transmit frequencies at 500 and 501 would be 2 transmitter third order intermod products at 499 and 502. So as you can see, if these microphones get close enough to each other, those intermod products may be strong enough that they're going to cause some interference. And so we're wanting to avoid placing other devices right on top of those intermod products. So the software is calculating this and then determining where those intermod products could potentially land, and then avoiding assigning those to other devices. Fifth order calculations are very similar. Here's an example of how you do the fifth order calculation. Obviously, this is pretty simple math, but as you start adding more and more frequencies and start thinking about doing a 2 transmitter third order calculation and then a 2 transmitter fifth order calculation, maybe a 3 transmitter third order calculation, all of a sudden you get many, many, many possible results. Where if you have a system of 10 frequencies, you could already have thousands of potential intermod products. So the software is also making some determination on which ones do we care about and which ones can we feel safe to ignore. Obviously, we talked about spacing being one of the significant factors here, and then also power levels are going to matter additionally. So let's see, within IAS, we're going to have an option window that shows you specifically what IAS is doing to avoid potential intermod products once it's calculated them. So there are a couple of things that you want to understand under the hood here. Default bandwidth is an important thing. The default bandwidth is essentially saying how far apart am I spacing these different transmitters? Even if there weren't intermod products, like how close can I get microphone 1 to microphone 2 for them to both operate reliably? Within IAS, the default is 0.299 megahertz, which essentially means that you have to have greater than that spacing between your different transmitters. So 300 kilohertz spacing between them. If you wanted to change that for a more robust coordination, or if you have some knowledge of the particular equipment you're operating, you can change that default bandwidth. Same thing with how far do we have to space our microphones away from potential intermod products. In this case, your defaults are showing you're avoiding 2 transmitter thirds by 100 kilohertz, you're avoiding 3 transmitter thirds by 50 kilohertz, and you're avoiding 2 transmitter fifths by 90 kilohertz. And again, you could change those if you wanted to. If you have a frequency coordination that includes a large number of microphones, maybe in some tight spectrum, you may want to start to ignore intermod products between frequencies that are spaced fairly far apart. One example I give with this is if you had electrosonics microphone that tuned within maybe 24 meg worth of bandwidth, you could think about setting a bypass window at 30 megahertz, saying that if we have more than 30 megahertz between these microphones, they're going to filter out that other frequency because it's outside of their tuning range. So that's an option there, basically intended to give you more available frequencies, but you want to understand that when you enable that bypass window, you are excluding some potential intermod products. You're saying, I don't care about these, they're unlikely to happen. And then the next tab here, I think, is actually something we'll bounce back to Cody and have him pull up in the software. We just want to show you the different broadcast standards for folks that are not in the United States.
And I think I got it up there now.
Okay, yeah, so just if you go to broadcast standard, NTSC is the analog broadcast standard that we used to use for US TV, although we're primarily digital at this point. PAL is something that's more commonly used overseas, Europe, and a lot of places. And then below that's their digital broadcast standard. ATSC is what's used in the United States, but in Europe you'll see DVB-T in other countries. And in here you want to know what your bandwidth is for that TV channel. So ATSC TV channels are 6 meg wide, but DVB-T 8 meg is very common. ISDB-T is primarily Brazil, I believe, but we've got all those options in there in case you're doing the coordination somewhere outside of the United States. Just make sure to go and set this before you really do anything else, because it's going to change your graph and it's going to have a huge impact on your coordination. So let's see, we got anything we want to go over with questions before we get back to
One quick thing that I forgot to do in the just kind of the overview is your two zones. If you add a zone, it will not calculate the intermod potentials between zones. It'll just avoid direct hits. So that's the difference between zone 1 and zone 2.
Right, yeah, within a zone, intermod calculations are done. Between zones, all it's looking is that bandwidth requirement or that spacing requirement.
Basically, it's preventing any frequency from being on top of another frequency. So you're protecting them.
Yeah, essentially direct hit. While we're here, let's also, Cody, can you go into the view menu and let's just bring up that list of models. So if you have any questions about what models are in IAS and what they're using for a bandwidth or intermod spacing, look in here. If it just says default, that means it uses the defaults from the menu we just looked at. If it's got a different number in here, that means the software is overriding the defaults and using a different value. And most of this is based on information that we have from manufacturers, or in some cases just information from folks in the field and what they're using. And as Cody talked about, you can build a custom model if you don't like what we're doing in here with these bandwidth and intermod spacing settings. You can build your own. Let's say, for example, you wanted to increase the spacing between your money mic for the show. You could build a special user defined model for that required, let's say, 400 kilohertz instead of 300 kilohertz spacing, and maybe 150 kilohertz between your intermod products.
One question that I've seen come up is why is it $299 instead of $300?
Yeah, because software programmers are software programmers. It's a
greater than value. So
yeah.
it needs, if you want 300, it's basically just meaning greater than 299, which would be above 300.
Yeah,
so that's our reasoning behind that. And it's just important to know for everyone too. If you wanted a 300 spacing, you would do 299.
Yes. And these numbers are all in megahertz. So as I'm talking about 300 kilohertz spacing, remember that that's 0.3 megahertz. And that's why it's 0.299 in the settings.
And for my friend Birdie here in Nashville, who is submitting a question, you update right now through the website. So the website on our deck, if you download the latest version, that's the same as updating.
Yep, and there's an option in the software to do it, but only do that once you're on the latest version, because some of the older versions, there's a web security issue with doing an auto update.
Lots of questions about adding a generic. Do we want to get into that right now, or do you want to wait for that?
Yeah, let's get to that after Loren does his
Okay.
coordination example.
Then I think we're go ahead and move on.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Loren Sherman.
You want to flip it to Loren now or back to you,
Yeah,
Garrett?
please.
Yes, sir.
So we are going to do an actual coordination from what was a game at Camp Randall Stadium on back in September of last year. So we're just going to start with our blank screen here, and we're just going to start totally from scratch. So the first thing we'll do is open up our TV wizard, and we're just going to use the zip code of the venue, since we do have a scan that we're going to import in. So that gives us DTV. Of course, that gives it to us based on FCC information as of today. So some things will change. We'll go ahead and import our sweep data, and we're going to use this scan from September of last year. And this is all before the repack in Madison, Wisconsin. So we're just deactivating the DTV stations that don't match up with what our scan shows. So we're saying that our scan is the best information that we have. So we're going to just give this a name. And with this, we have 2 zones that have been provided for us by the stadium as stuff that's used in the stadium every week. So we're going to start by going up to the import. We're going to bring in the Wisconsin coach communication frequencies that were pre-coordinated, are used every week in this venue. And you can see, if you look at the graph at the bottom, where everything has been added for these BTR1s. And again, this is all based on last September. It's not anything that would happen this upcoming September. So we're going to add another zone. These are the house frequencies that are also used every week. And the house frequencies that are used every week consist of a BTR 800, some G1 microphones, and some Electro B1 block that are used on the field during the game. And then we have these stadium mics that are used in suites, meeting rooms. Some of them might even be used for some pregame activities on the field. We want to make them part of our coordination for the entire event, so that there's no question about if somebody turns something on, if we're going to have a problem. We obviously want to avoid during the football game problems at all costs. So the next thing that we will add, we have the house, we have kind of our skeleton now built of what happens in that venue all the time. Now we have all the itinerant stuff that maybe we don't have as much control over, and maybe changes once in a while. So we're going to start with our home radio broadcast. So we're going to set up a radio zone. And they have asked for a Electrosonics Block 20. They want a main frequency and a backup frequency. So we're going to pull that up, calculate it, come up with our list of suggested frequencies, and we're just going to zoom in on that so we can take a better look at block 20. This will be for their sideline microphone. So we want to look around and see kind of what's in that block already and what those items are and where we have some spaces. So over here is a house microphone. So using 523.5 might work out for us. We want to have, they've also asked for a block 21 IFB, and you have the same talent that's going to have that IFB receiver and that mic transmitter. So the most space we can get between the block 20 microphone and the block 21 IFB, we kind of want to do that so we don't have any issue or any concern of them having issues with their equipment where their microphone might interfere with their IFB receiver with the front end of their receiver. So let's look down over here. We have a microphone for the house, and over here we have another microphone for the house. That's a nice spot in between, plenty of protection. We can pick 513.6, and then we want to give them a backup. So we can use that other one that we had looked at, that 523.5 as a backup for them. But ultimately, we don't know when they might switch to a backup. They may not even say anything to us. They may pick their backup as their main without even thinking what's main, what's backup. We want to know that they're going to be good no matter what, whichever frequency they pick. So we're going to move those two in here. Give it a label. And if you have contact information, you may want to put that in there as well. The name of whoever the engineer is for home radio and a cell phone number should you need to be able to reach them. That's a perfect place to put that in there. So now we're going to go ahead and give them their IFB. So that's a block 21. We're going to pick that from the range. We already have the make and model. Calculate that, and it gives us a nice list of frequencies. So now we're going to look at our block 21. So again, we're looking to give them as much separation between the mic and IFB. We stayed kind of low on the IFB side. We can take a look around and see what these other items are. So this is a transmitter already for this C3 BTR, which belongs to the house. And over here, we have one of the sideline transmitters for the coach communications. So any of these three frequencies are going to work out for us very well. So let's take the 561.4, and we want to find them a backup just in case. Preferably something in a slightly different area. So over here we have a coach communication frequency and some open space. So we'll give them this 548.9 as a backup. We're going to move those items over. You also have an option here. If you want to go in, you can double click on a frequency and you can give it a name. So I can say that the 548.9 is a backup. As an option, you can do this if you need or want to.
Hey, Loren.
Yeah.
A couple of quick things here. It was asked that based on the information that we brought in of this scan, it's safe to say that the coach comm was actually on while the scan was being taken.
That is correct. Sorry, I failed to mention that. Coach comm was active when the scan was taken.
And then when you imported some of the venue frequencies, he was able to import those because they were exported from a previous IAS coordination.
That is also correct. Both the coach communication and the home radios have existed in past coordinations before, so we know that they're good together.
Would you be able to right click one of your zones and just show where the zone export exists? So he would have clicked that export zone. you'd save it to a file, and then if you were to go to another coordination or send it to someone that's about to work in that venue, that's when you would use that import zone function that we talked about. All right, thanks.
So we've got now home radio is in. So in traditional format of most university games, we've heard nothing from the visiting team, reached out to them, haven't heard anything. So the only other request that we have at this point is our biggest request that's going to come in from the outside, which is TV. And this comes to us from, it's for Fox, and the Fox equipment for this game is provided by CP Communications. So I actually would have been the one that would have sent this off to the coordinator for this event. And if you're looking in the deck, if you're following along in the slides, which are not up on the screen, a sample of that request is slide number 22, if you're following along. So they've asked for a talent microphone in G57. They're looking for 3 frequencies. So they're using this as a frequency diversity microphone, which requires 2 frequencies for the primaries, and then also a backup frequency. Should they have an issue with one of those 2 frequencies, they would have somewhere to go. They're looking for a block 21 IFB, a block 24 IFB for their parab queue, a RAD intercom, and 4 effects mics plus a backup for their parab microphones, an ENG kit that could be used. There's no information here, but crews could use that for something that comes up at the last minute as an effects mic, or they could just use it for some pregame ENG work. You never know. We want to plan on worst case scenario that could be used at any time. And then Fox has also asked for a stick mic and an IFB to be used for a pregame web show. But again, we're going to put it into the coordination. If for some reason something happens and they need to use this for the game, we don't want to take a chance that, oh, sorry, I already gave that frequency. I got to move this here, move that there. We'll be able to just use that. So we're going to go ahead and add in some of this stuff. So we're going to create a new zone. And we're going to call that our broadcast TV zone, and Fox is the broadcaster for this game. So we'll go up here to our make, change that to sure. Axient Digital is the first one, so it's automatically going to populate, and we're using G57 for that. So this takes a little bit longer because there's so many options for frequencies. So sometimes it takes a couple of minutes, sometimes a little bit faster, in order to come up with the suggested frequencies that have been calculated for Intermod for Shure Axient Digital. In the left-hand corner, you'll see where it says testing frequencies, and now it's changed the potential thirds. So we have over 1 million different potential thirds that have been sorted out through the 88 frequencies that it has suggested. So we're going to pick 3 of those. We're going to look for some nice spectrum. Zoom out here real quick so you can see across the board we have quite a selection of frequencies, but we have a lot of stuff down in channels 14, 15, and 16 that are just microphones. So that's a perfect place to put our sideline talent to keep it away from any other transmitters that are producing higher power. So no in-ear monitors, no IFBs, no BTRs, no RADs, nothing. We're just keeping this to a microphone area. So we need to come up with 3 frequencies for this. So there's nothing from here. Now remember, this signal that you see here is because something was on during the scan. and that was from a previous event. So sometimes you don't have a perfectly clean, but if you know that that is something that's not normally in that venue, you're okay to not have to worry about avoiding it. So we're going to pick 475.675. So we go up here and check that off. And that's going to be in channel 14. You'll see with my cursor in 14 on the lower right-hand corner of the screen, it tells you where my cursor is and it tells you you're in channel 14. So if I actually highlight this, you'll see in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see it says it's 469, we're close, and we're in channel 14. So we're going to pick something out of channel 15. Again, looking for best possible separation. We have this 478.3. And we're going to look for one more in channel 16. Again, just trying to avoid other transmitters that might be out there, other things. We're going to pick 484.050. Give that a label. And now they've asked for an IFB, which is in block 21. So again, we want to just look around and see what everything's there. As you may remember, we've already done some block 21 stuff, but conveniently, we pretty much only have transmitters in this band. So to add an IFB, we want to be careful. We want to give enough separation, but we can pick out, let's say 551.2 and 560.1. Both of those would be good options that we feel comfortable based on looking at our spectrum scan that we're able to use these frequencies for Fox to have no issues during the game. Obviously, that's our main goal here, is that the rights holder has a clean game.
Hey, Loren, you want to take a quick question about zones?
Sure.
So we've got a number of different people asking questions about all these zones that you're adding. Can you talk about intermod calculation within a zone and then spacing between the other zones? What does it mean when one of them is gray and italic, and what does it mean when something is bold? You know, the zone you're working on versus the other zones that you've built, etc.
So the bold zone is the one you're working on. Anything that's italicized, so if we go up here and we look at the sidelines, all those italicized one, I'm just not working on that zone. So if you're scrolling around, it makes it a little bit easier to find the zone that you're working on. I am checking for intermods within the zone that I'm in. So for broadcast TV, I'm checking Fox intermods with just the Fox equipment. I'm not checking any intermods between the coach communications. I am just preventing direct hits with the coach communications. What I want to make sure on the broadcast side is chances of my 2 parab or 4 parab mics intermodding with each other are pretty slim, since they're going to be in 4 different quadrants of the field. But if I have 2 IFBs that are in my rack, that gear is racked with the receive rack, then those 2 IFBs could intermod with one of the receivers for one of the parabs, and then that parab mic isn't going to work. So I want to make sure that I make sure my intermods are done between all of their gear, not just some of it, but everything that they're using. And for the most part, they're going to be away from other users with the majority of their gear. What else did you have for me?
No, that was it. I think we just had a bunch of questions about how are you deciding what's in what zone, and I think that's exactly it, where you're thinking about equipment proximity and will these microphones be close enough to other microphones or other IFB transmitters that they want to be included in the same zone, and you want to think about intermod, or do you think that something that's let's say on the visiting sideline versus the home sideline, is that's far enough apart, you can put them in separate zones and just coordinate them as 2 separate areas.
My general rule of thumb is I take stuff, if I know where everybody is, I take stuff by the client and coordinate their stuff together. Obviously, that doesn't always work. I will, as you'll see as I move along, we will eventually run into our visiting radio people, and their booth is generally near, I don't know how Camp Randall is, but generally they're very close to each other.
Yeah, it's right next door.
Yeah, to the point that I've had guys hang antennas out the window and you've got their 2 antennas right next to each other. They don't see that because there's a little wall in between, but they are physically next to each other. So we want to make sure that they are intermodded with each other. So some of it is known quantities when you go into it because you've been there before. Some of it, you kind of have to guess how everyone's going to set up and hope for the best, and then hopefully have some time to make adjustments if need be once you're on site and some issues maybe pop up.
Yeah, that covers it. Thanks.
All right, so moving along, we have a block 24 IFB for the Parab queue that Fox will be using. So again, this was before the repack, so we don't have any T-Mobile stuff that we're worried about right now. We were just using an existing coord. So in the real world today, you can't do what we're about to do, other than the fact that Fox wouldn't be asking for a block 24 anymore because there's no place to put it. So this is all based on past experience. So again, we want to give them a little bit of separation. We want to see what's there. We can do that just by dragging our cursor. So this is a BTR receive for the coach. Obviously something that's a lower power. We don't want anything near that. We want to avoid that. And that's primarily what we're looking at here, is all different coach communication stuff. And again, most of that stuff is not anything that you're going to see in the near future. A lot of that coach communication in the UHF spectrum is gone now. So we can give them something around 620.8. Our closest receive frequency is 626.050. Gives us plenty of separation. And we'll give them a backup way down at the other end, also avoiding as much as we possibly can, 638.7. And we'll move those items over and we'll label that with Parab IFB. So I'm going to skip over the RAD, and we're going to move to a different coordination where I've actually completed the majority of this. And the reason that I'm going to avoid the RAD is that's something that takes a lot of time to calculate, because currently, going by last September, I can use 470 to 698, and that takes a while to calculate that out. So as they do on the cooking shows, we will minimize that, and we're going to maximize this other coordination, which has everything for the broadcast TV for Fox. You'll see I have the RAD here. I have the VHF channels and the UHF channels already picked out.
Loren, we've got one quick question about adding frequencies to an existing group that's come up a couple of times. If you wanted to add another Parab IFB frequency for whatever reason,
sure, we'll do that right now.
would really just add it in as an unassigned zone and drag it into the Parab IFB area. As long as you're in the proper zone,
yeah, you have
it comes in as unassigned,
sure,
and then you can add it to an assignment, right?
That's actually not how I have been doing it. So we'll go back and we'll use that. That's a perfect example. We'll go back and try to grab another block 24. We'll calculate that. Now we've added more things, so our amount of frequencies has potentially gone down from before because we've added a bunch more frequencies to this. But here's our block 24. You can see the light blue lines. Those are our options. So 622.1 became our visiting radio IFB. We're only adding another IFB. Let's pick this 620 we can even use, kind of right on the edge of things. So I selected, so I remember what I selected. And then it's our Parab IFB, which is right over here. I always get as close as I can so it doesn't drop in the wrong place. You can just grab it and you can drag it over and drop it right in. And then you can see I have 637.1, 639.6, and 620. If you go back up to the top, right click on it, refresh the list, it'll actually fix it and put them in numerical order. I hope that answered that question, Gary.
And this only works in the active zone, correct?
It will only work in the active zone. I can actually show you a great example. We'll put it in and then we'll delete it out. Let's say I either do it accidentally or try to do it on purpose. I'm going to try to put it in the house zone. You can see that's not my active zone. I'm just going to take 620.5 and I'm going to drag it into the BTR, and there it is. This move will invalidate the frequency coordination. It invalidates it because it was never calculated for that zone, and because it wasn't calculated, now there's no intermods and you have an invalid frequency coordination. So I can say okay, and it's there. We're going to take that back out though. And we do that just by right clicking and clicking remove frequency.
Mind if I tell you a little trick that I use?
No, absolutely.
Go back down to that zone that is not active, right click on any frequency, and go to range search. Now, that's going to find frequencies that are calculated intermod for that grayed out zone that work for that section only. So drag one of those frequencies into your BTR area and it's added properly. So you don't have to make the zone active as long as you do the search from right clicking on the frequency you want.
Great tip.
And Loren, if you could elaborate just a bit, there's a couple comments in here that there's now a lot more lines than there was before. So do the colors have any indication on what's going on? Does that differentiate different gear, or what do the colors mean on the lines?
Are we talking about the name, the equipment colors?
Your each frequency in there, so the candidates and the actual frequencies that are coordinated. The question is like, do the dark blue lines mean IFB, and then the other colored lines mean
Okay.
mics?
So
or
we'll open this up so it's a little easier to see, get rid of all of that information. So the lines, if we go back, the dark blue lines are everything that's been assigned, whether it's a mic, an IFB, a BTR belt pack, whatever it might be. Those are the dark blue lines. The light blue lines are your candidate frequencies. So if we go back to Electro block 24, calculate, now you see all these light blue lines that are in there. The light blue lines match this list of candidate frequencies at the top. I hope that answers that.
Perfect explanation.
So here's just a little thing that I do. When I'm doing my RADs, I try to keep as many belt packs in the same channel so I can keep some other channels elsewhere in the spectrum for any VHF microphones or VHF IFBs, trying to keep as much separation. So what I did, if I just were to calculate VHF, if I went up here, picked RAD, picked the VHF, it's going to take a bit to calculate it out because we don't have any DTV. So here's everything that's possibly available. But I want to squeeze some more stuff down into channel 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these all digital TVs temporarily. And then I'm just going to calculate what's there. And now I can start to just fill up channel 7 with more rad belt packs, as opposed to spreading them out all over my VHF. And then I don't know what ENG guys are going to bring in. I don't know what last minute entertainment stuff might come up. I have kind of put all of my rads in one place, and I haven't put them all over the spectrum. Again, you're not looking at a device that is high power, and I want to make sure I keep mics and IFBs away from the belt packs so they will function properly when the guys go to use that. So we'll undo that. I happen to know from everything that I know, since the game already happened, I don't have any other VHF. It never happened. So I can open these all back up. And we can clear this candidates list. So again, before the questions, I switched over to another IAS file that has everything that Fox needs. We've got their ENG mic in there. We have their Parab IFB. We have their pregame mic and pregame IFB, but we're going to keep that again as part of the full coordination. Then we have the RAD. You'll see that the RAD is actually down all the way down here in channel 51. There's nothing there. We still had active TV in 49 and 50 at that point. This was an open channel that I was able to put a bunch of rad stuff in and not have to worry about it. And I've done that a lot. When we had access to it, I would use some of the upper channels as the ENG guys were getting away from owning any block 25, 26, 27, and they were buying all kinds of block 470 and block 19, and I was filling up down there. I could take rads on a large show and I could put all the rad transmits close together because of their modulation, and I could put them in channel 51 and I could have a rad only transmit channel. And that's where I would throw everything and I would protect them that way. Again, part of doing a band plan is figuring a lot of that stuff out. Unfortunately, for a lot of football games and things like that, you have no control of what anybody brings to the party. And since you have no control over what they bring, a lot of your band plan unfortunately goes out the window as you're just trying to get everything shoehorned in. In this case, it's not a huge coordination. So again, if you're following along in the slide deck, we've added on slide 23, we've added down here into radio. We have visiting radio IFB and a visiting radio mic that we've added in block 470 and block 24. And so the last thing that we can go through, and this is the big thing that takes every good coordination, and you still hope for the best, but these are the guys that can leave you with the most problems as you try to accommodate. The ENG guys who just show up day of game and say, oh, I didn't know there was frequency coordination, but we want to accommodate them as well whenever possible. I will be honest, as a lot of people may know, I have no problem saying no. If there isn't a place to put them that's going to work, then there isn't a place to put them. And to jeopardize another ENG guy when they go into the locker room and the big gangbang of interviews, there's no real benefit to give everyone a frequency if nobody's frequency is going to work, because they're all standing on top of each other and you haven't performed any kind of intermod in their zone. So what I do, we'll go up here to broadcast TV, which is our active zone, and we're going to right click on it and we're going to add zone and set as active. We're going to call this one our ENG zone. And we're going to add our ENG guys. So we have Big Ten Network came. They're looking for 2 frequencies in block 470, 3 in block 20, and 2 in block 24. So we look around and see what we can provide for them. So again, we have to unzoom our graph and then zoom in on the 470 area. The only way to zoom in and out is you zoom in and you can keep zooming in. I can look closer at 470, but if I want to back out, it backs me all the way out, and then I start zooming in again. There's no backing up one zoom. So it's all the way out and then zoom in as much as you want. So we'll look at all these again. That whole area down in channel 14 and 15 and even 16 was a lot of microphones. So we're pretty comfortable fitting them in where they have lots of separation. It's not a very active game. So we're happy about that. So we'll take this 483.6 and 490.2. And we'll give that over to Big 10. And then they want 2 in block 20. So we're going to look around in block 20. I'm going to just zoom in one more here. I always like to give a little overlap of the other band because I want to make sure what I'm looking at the beginning of the next block, if we're talking about electro, I want to see what the next block is. I don't want to just look at this block and then say, oh, look at that, I put them in a DTV, or I just put an IFB 300 kilohertz away from a microphone, and I probably don't want that. So they've asked for 3 frequencies in 20. 20's got a lot going on. But again, these are microphones that they've asked for, so we have plenty of room to put stuff in. So we've got some house microphones here. We can easily pick this 513.4, 516.2, and we'll sneak the third one in here, down here at 533.8. We move those selected ones. We're still staying within the same assignment here. It's the ENG zone, but this is the assignment. And the last thing they wanted were 2 microphones in block 24. This one might get a little trickier because remember, we put a lot of IFBs in this zone. And this is where I always try to put the user and their phone number, because if you're going to have to call anyone, it's usually the ENG guys. Those are the ones that we might need to make a change to, or maybe we see them on the field from our perch in a press box that there's an issue and we see that they're right there and we need to be able to reach out to them. So you definitely want to give the name and a phone number of that user. So we've got an ESPN ENG crew that wanted a block 22 and a block 26, 2 in each. So again, we're already in the electrosonics window. We're just changing the range to a block 22. Calculate that out, zoom in on it. And again, we already know we're coming to the end. So putting them in large areas where there's nothing around them is perfect. We don't have to worry about that. Maybe we're going to screw up our coordination by putting someone in the middle of some open space and all of a sudden we lose some other space that we might need, because now this is game day. And then they wanted 2 and 26. So in 26, we still have a lot of DTV, but we still have some spectrum. We just kind of want to take a look around and see what's there. We had the Fox pregame IFB. We have a belt pack for coach comms, another belt pack for coach comms, and another IFB for the pregame, and another coach comm belt pack. But plenty of room to put in some microphones. So that gives us our two of our ENG guys. There's one more thing I wanted to go back for, because this is just a known quantity from having worked the stadium before that you may see. It's right down here. There's been an exclusion that's been built in here. And I think we might have gone over this. You can edit the active spectrum. And this is frequency hopping spread spectrum intermod. So this is something that in this building is coming from poorly placed 2.4 access points, and the intermod shows up between 593 and 594. So it's just been excluded in this building. We don't want to give a camera guy anything there because it's already been a problem. We know it's a problem, so we can just go in on our coordination, we can exclude it, and the range is denied and nothing will pop up in there. So there's a couple more ENG guys, and Cody just popped up. I was gonna ask if there were any questions.
Yeah, looks like we got a couple for you if you're ready for a few of them.
Sure.
So if you are at the point where you're done with your coordination and someone reports that they are getting hits or having challenges with their frequency, do you recalculate or do you force a recalculate, and what's your thought process behind that?
So on a large event, if this is something during the event, I'm gonna give you a new frequency. And I don't generally go in. So let's say Gary calls us, is 483.6. He's having problems with, he's okay with his 490.2, but he didn't request a backup and he needs a backup. We want to get that fixed now. We don't want to wait because now we're in the event. If Gary calls me and it's before the event, that's a different story. But let's start with, it's in the middle of the event. This is an emergency. We're just going to go into the software. We're going to go back to our block 470, calculate that. It doesn't want to show me anything.
This might be a good segue.
There it is. So it gives me some more frequencies. We will zoom out. And it was his 483 that was a problem. We have a real nice frequency, 478. There's plenty of spacing between the G1 from the house and another G1 from the house. So we're going to tell Gary, go ahead and use 478. Stop using the frequency that you were having an issue with, and you're good to go. If Gary calls me and this is a 4-day event and this is, hey, I'm Fox and we're having an issue with a frequency, I'm going to take one of the guys on my team and I'm going to send them out to try to figure out what the problem is. Experience has been, a lot of times it's user error, and maybe we can correct that problem. Maybe it's the way the equipment was designed, maybe a pad wasn't put in line. It could be a lot of things that could have happened. We want to save as many backup frequencies on a large show to be backup frequencies for the large show. So in order to do that, we want to solve what the problem is and be able to salvage that frequency. So a replacement frequency is passed out as needed And if there's time to hunt down the problem, we want to do that first.
Great. So this bottom left portion of the spectrum that has never moved every time you have scanned in and out, or you have zoomed in or zoomed out. Why is that?
So there's a pane here, which is where we're separating VHF over here on the left and UHF. So if I want to zoom in on VHF, I have to zoom in on VHF there, and I can unzoom VHF on that side. And now I'm seeing low VHF and high VHF. And I've just been zooming in on the UHF.
Great. Do you ever utilize, and where would you utilize, the force recalculate function with a specific frequency?
So force recalculation and just recalculate are really good if you have the same gear that's traveling to multiple venues. I'm not one to speak on it, but I understand a lot in entertainment where you're taking the same rack of gear and you're going to different places. It's really helpful to be able to do that. So you go in, you could download another scan, you could use the TV wizard to recalculate with latitude and longitudes. So you build a whole new file and then you recalculate your frequencies around a new DTV spectrum.
Right. And then maybe
let me just expand on that a little bit. If you're touring with a group and you put all the names of the wireless mics in your frequency list, or the names of all the in-ear monitors, and you just look up another bunch of frequencies over here in the candidate list and pick one and drag it over in, then you have to rename that unit. Whereas what you can do is right click on the frequency that's already been named on your list and do a force recalculate. And well, there's two things in there, recalculate and force recalculate. If you do recalculate and the frequency is fine for intermod, it's not going to change at all. But if you know that's a bad frequency, then you know you want to force it to change. Then you do a force recalculate. Go ahead and do that. And it's going to find a new frequency for that unit over on the left and change it. If it's a new frequency, change it to a yellow mark. Now, doing this, you've lost your old frequency. So you don't know what it was before. You can do an undo up on top and get back to what your old frequency was. But in general, if you're a tour and only you have a bunch of mics, they're always use the same thing. You're not doing like a basketball or a football show with a lot of different itinerant people. Force recalculate might work for you. You still have to look at the frequency and see if it's going to work for you. But I think that addresses what he was saying about force recalculate and not recalculate.
Yeah. I was just a couple questions on when to utilize that and what's the difference between the two.
Yeah.
It's also good to note that you can actually recalculate a zone as well if that comes into play. So,
Same deal.
So Loren, here's the fun question of the day for you.
Well, hey, Cody, you also want to note, if you've got a frequency that's reported bad, I would list that in your file, and you can also change that. Yeah, maybe Loren, just show how, like I just reported that I've got a bad frequency at 478. So what do you do with that?
Well, you have a couple of options. I can take it out. I can say that it's not coordinated and make it red under the set to button here. I can, if I want to just keep it in there, keep it as everything, I can double click on it. Maybe. There it is. And just change the name. And the name can just be bad. Now it's in my coordination and it's labeled bad.
And that's a great way to utilize that portion of the naming when you have hundreds of frequencies. That's
because I don't want to take it out because I need to know that it's bad. If I take it out, that means I'm going to give it to somebody else potentially. And we don't want to do that. If we can't identify what the problem is, because it's a smaller show or a fast enough show, we want to be able to not give that to somebody else. We want to be able to identify that it's bad. So keeping it in the coordination is not a bad thing.
Yep. And so then another question here. In the RF coordinator world, you have had a pretty great day, meaning every time you've looked for a frequency, it has generated some. So what happens when it doesn't give you any?
Well, I actually can bring up another IAS here. I think. Or maybe
This
not.
is live webinaring, man. It's all good. It is
Yep.
all good. This is the new world we're in.
Maybe while you're working on that for a second here.
Oh, here it is.
Oh,
I
okay.
have it right here. So this is not a finished version of the NBA Finals in 2019 in Oakland. So we're in our ENG zone. You can see there's a lot of lines here. This is where you notice what happened in our world of frequency coordination, where all these ENG guys went to the low bands. So I'm really full up in the lower bands. So I can go over here. Cody comes in. His TV station bought what everybody else went out and bought. They bought some G3 stuff in A band, because that's 516 to 558. Pick the range and we calculate it, and we got a couple frequencies, so we can give these out. So Cody's got his station has 4, so I give out my 4 frequencies. So we click on those, we move the selected frequencies, we gave them to Cody. Now Gary shows up, and Gary wants 516 to 558. We've got nothing. We can look at our options. We were only doing thirds, and we still want to do thirds because all these guys are going to be crammed in a locker room doing interviews after the game. That's what they're all doing. So we have nothing. That's what it comes down to. So we need to tell everybody, and we post signs when we do games. Sorry, these are the spectrums that are full. And at this point, we would tell people, I'm sorry, there is nothing available in the A band. This is it. And it is perfectly acceptable to do that, other than potentially to some of the individuals that are told no, because they will tell you they can't do their job and it's impossible. But ultimately, what's worse is if you give them frequencies, because I have an option here. I can go into my options, I can take thirds off, and I can calculate it. Look at all the frequencies that I just came up with. But then all these same guys are going to go into the locker room and say, well, you gave me crappy frequencies. So it's a lose-lose, but I have found more people can be happy if you give them good frequencies than if you give everyone bad frequencies.
So we're really looking at the power of, the pre-production and knowing what you're talking about with your clients and your vendors, band planning, and really maintaining the integrity of your coordination through this. Because as he said, we always have options, right? We can always figure out how to generate another one. It's maintaining the integrity of this though, and really making sure that, if everyone's accountable for what they're doing, then everyone should be able to play well together. I mean, we can see there's a ton of frequencies in this, right? So he's made a lot work. It's just a really, really big aspect of what we do as coordinators and how we deal with this on a day-to-day basis.
I recently did a show that actually Gary was on with me, and we didn't give frequencies to any ENG guys. That everything within the bowl of that venue was for entertainment, for the broadcasters, for the halftime studio shows. No ENG guys got a single frequency, and they were all very successful in their shows. They didn't have any problems. All day long, they didn't have any problems because they were hardwired. And in most cases, they were hardwired to their camera, which was less than 10 feet away from the person that was on camera.
Right, so here's a question I have for you. You know, on a lot of these here, this is a great example of when you literally can run out of frequencies, right? Do you interact with this group before, you know, obviously a lot of these games, you know, the big games, especially, you know, the finals, those are things that everybody has a lot more heads up on. But like your college games, how much time do you really get with people before they show up? It sounds like your sign there, you know, is this a lot of this game day decisions?
You know, when we're doing any kind of signage and stuff like this, we're talking about multiple day
Right.
events. When you're
Mhm.
doing a single football game, that becomes a little more difficult because maybe you don't have the appropriate contact on the college level with the visiting teams and with their ENG crews that are coming. And if you're talking about a game that's not within your if it's like Gary does the Big Ten game. So if it's not a
Mhm.
Big Ten game, you may not have, if it's an SEC team coming in, they may not know how to get in touch with Gary Trenda. So they're not going to know that until game day.
Right.
When they come in, whether it's signage or just having people finding other people on the field. And this goes to, and I think you talked about it in your A2 lunch, was having the A2s work with you. I do that all the time. On the NBA, I gain a dozen set of eyes just by asking the A2s, hey, if they don't have a flag, you need to call me, and feel free to stop and question somebody. It's good to get everybody communicating.
Right, and I think this is true of a, you know, this same strategy you showed for a game applies to convention centers, to corporate events, anything that as you scale up, there's going to be more and more demand, and with limited bandwidth. Gary, you got any more questions? I didn't mean to sidetrack there, but I wanted to ask
No, we
that.
got a couple of quick ones.
Mm-hmm.
Can you export frequencies from IAS for use in other software like Wireless Workbench? Yes, you can. Someone was asking about Part 74 licenses. Can I, as a coordinator, assign out a frequency for, let's say, a quarter watt IFB if I don't have a Part 74 license? Part 74 license is for the operator of the equipment and not necessarily the frequency coordinator. So yes, if your operator has a Part 74 license, you can assign him a frequency for his equipment that he's operating legally. We've got, let's see, I think that's going to cover it for now.
There was a question from Jason Ruggles about the graph at the bottom of the screen. Can you bring that IAS picture back up?
It would be
sure.
our sample coordination, Loren,
Yeah,
the one we've been working on.
Right.
Yeah, so on the sample scan, that was a scan that I did at Camp Randall Stadium. The graph starts drawing it at the lowest noise floor of the scan, and so
Right.
I had some areas of the
obviously
scan.
that graph is not a calibrated window. So
Right.
wherever that thing happened, but there's another thing I wanted to point out.
Yeah, I had something that was dead quiet at, you know, neg 120, and so then for a lot of the UHF TV band, it shows neg 100.
I just looked at a scan of mine, and the scan showed on the screen the same as your minus 104, but in my scan it was minus 85. So obviously IAS draws it there, but as you drag your cursor along, so zoom in on a little section of the screen there and get rid of the Sennheiser setting. And now slowly move your cursor to the right, and on the lower right hand corner Not on there. Just see it says minus 82.3. Occasionally, not all the time, occasionally it will read out the level of the noise floor, but not only in certain places.
It doesn't when you're hovering over one of the data points that was on the
But
scan.
even when you're not on a data point, you have to move it very slowly, and then it will show it.
So that's a minus 74.4.
Right. But I can move a little bit to the right, and that minus 74 goes away. It just disappears. It's not displayed.
Yep. Because your scan comes in as discrete data points, and the software is just drawing lines.
Oh, your cursor may be falling on a frequency that isn't part of the scan.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Yep. Never mind.
Well, there you go, Pete. I'm glad we could answer one of your questions.
We do have 2 more quick ones.
Yeah, go right ahead.
If everyone's okay with that. And these are just kind of overall IAS questions. Why don't I see QLXD in the models?
You should. It'll be in a future update. ULXD and QLXD use the same band splits. So right now I'd recommend using ULXD, but we're going to add QLX to avoid that confusion.
And then another big one that we've seen kind of several times is whether this be Loren or Gary, can one of you guys just touch on generics and why we would use a generic frequency, or what are we doing with the generic frequencies?
They're just cheaper. That's the only thing.
They're much cheaper.
They're no name brand frequencies.
When you charge by the frequency, it works out much better.
That's right. Yeah. Well, one of the questions was good that we didn't get to was about coordinating equipment that maybe somebody brought in from overseas. And let's say it can tune in some frequencies that are legal in the US and some frequencies that aren't. If you don't have that built into IAS, a generic would be a good thing to grab for that, because you can just say, I want to give somebody a legal frequency between this point and this point. Like I want to go between 614 and 616 and find a frequency there for a piece of gear that may not be built into IAS. You could also do it if you're band planning. Let's say you've got a rad intercom and it tunes from 470 to 698, but I really want to put my rad intercoms between 502 and 528. And I could do that as a generic if I wanted to. And I just want to make sure that my generic settings within the software are going to be the same as the rad settings when I perform that calculation. Loren, what else do you use generics for?
I think you hit on most of it. You know, at CP, we have a lot of custom banded gear, and if some of it maybe doesn't go out a lot, but it comes in on a show, so I haven't created a model for it, I'll just throw it in as a generic. So that's kind of helpful. It allows you to just put anything in. Sometimes when you get really busy at a check-in, the guy comes up and he says, my microphone's at 513.2. Well, what kind of microphone? What do you, and you're looking at 15 guys in line. You put it as a generic, you type in 513.2, you look around, it turns out it's good. If he's happy, you're happy, it looks good in the coordination, moving on. And so you just put it in there as a coordination. It's more important to get his name and phone number than what his piece of gear is going to be.
Yeah, and sometimes they won't know the band split that they're operating in. They won't know the tuning range. It depends on the user.
It's amazing how often that happens, actually.
Yeah.
We had a question from Kevin Hugh about environments, show environments with really high noise floor and what coordination strategies you could use to work with that. Well, I did a couple of shows with a noise floor caused by a video screen that was a good 15 dB above normal. So I was up in the 80s. And basically I had to just keep trying frequencies over and over and over and over again until I found one that worked. Didn't look any different on the screen, but till I found one that worked in the situation I was in. And he says, excluding just moving your antenna or adjusting squelch. Well, that's what I would do first. Move your antenna.
Yeah, do what we talked about in the webinar last week and
Exactly.
optimize your antenna position and optimize your gain structure there if you can. Definitely. I was on a show last December where they turned on a bunch of Versatube lights and the VHF noise floor increased substantially. And I plugged my analyzer into the output from my VHF multicoupler and just started looking for the lowest noise floor in between these little spikes of noise that the
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
inexpensive, light driving chips or
Yeah.
power supplies are putting out, and just trying to sneak into that lowest noise floor as you can after you've optimized your antenna. It gives you, kind of the best of a bad situation. Like as we were talking about before with some of this stuff, your band planning and all these other things you do with your coordination may not survive first contact with the enemy, and then you just got to figure out what you can do to make the show happen.
Well, speaking about band planning, we were talking about replacing your frequencies and everything. And if you do have a band planned and you pulled up a list of all the possible frequencies that you could coordinate, it does tell you what channel those frequencies fall in. So you can sort of say, okay, the replacement things go into my mic area and my ear area. Is it a mic or ear? I'll just stick it in that closest correct type of band equipment I want to put it in.
Yeah, and I like what Loren was doing too, where he's thinking about his band planning with his mics and his IFBs and looking at that. And even when he's assigning out some mic channels, he says, well, I'm putting this one in TV 14 and putting this other one in TV 15. So I know I've got plenty of spacing between it. And even if I get some broadband interference in TV 14, I've got my backup over in a whole nother TV channel.
In a different band, right?
Yeah.
How many times do we collect a scan throughout a show? Like, am I looking at when I first show up there and that's the only time I ever get a scan? Do I do it 6 times a day? How do we know?
Scan when I arrive outdoors, outside the venue, and then I scan inside the venue to find out what TV stations are operable. But I always start my cord with the scan outside, which is the worst case. Only if I run out of frequencies do I try to find a weak channel to stick them on inside. And technically, you have to have a Part 74 license to put a wireless mic on top of a TV station, even if you're indoors. So I'd be careful about doing that.
Yeah, and a lot of times you scan as much as is practical, really. Like I've assigned out frequencies. If I'm just the coordinator in an event, like this football game as an example, I'm scanning up until and after kickoff to make sure that some other ENG crew didn't come in, and just turn on and we're not aware of what they're doing.
What I usually do during a show is use my spectrum analyzer in 1 megahertz chunks and look at every one of my main frequencies in the half hour before a show to see if somebody has popped up within less than 200 kilohertz of my main frequency. At that point, I will either find them or more easily just change my frequency.
Right, change the one you have control of.
Exactly.
I travel an assassin and we usually find them and have them killed, but everyone does it different.
So I was looking for some kind of laser radio frequency finder device that we could just put up and just zap the operator, no problem.
I got a
if you
guy.
have the time, retuning your IFB to the frequency that they're using usually gets them to do another clear scan and move, right?
I've done that many years ago on a Super Bowl. The network had a high-powered IFB that they didn't have a license for. They were using a frequency that our repeater was on, and they were swamping keying on our repeater for 100% duty cycle, and we couldn't find them. And we finally got the SBE guy to come, and he found them. He found the transmitter for us, and his answer was, well, that's the broadcast network. I'm really not going to go to them and tell them they can't have that IFB. So we just keyed on our transmitter and put a 1K tone into it. And Lynn Swan ripped the IFB out of his ear, and the network changed the frequency for him. And then we were okay.
So everyone's got a different way.
Boy, it's funny what the battlefield brings out in people, isn't it? Man,
Yeah.
I got to remember that about Mac. If I hear 1K, it's not just tinnitus, it may be Mac.
I'm going to use
You just
900
never know.
Yeah.
So
it was Larry's suggestion.
well,
Yeah,
okay, there you go. That's a good call there.
Exactly.
So we kind of pretty good spot, you think, folks?
I think so. Loren, you finished through everything you wanted to do in your coordination, correct?
I did. We finished that off.
Okay. Because I certainly don't want to hold up. If people got questions coming in, we're happy to talk about that.
Yeah, here's a late question about, where can you watch it from the beginning because you came in late.
We got that.
Pete, would you like
You
to
had to be
explain?
here at the beginning. You had to be
Turn
here.
back time.
We're not going to repeat all this stuff over again. No.
Everything is available on the website for replay about 24 hours after the live broadcast.
Yeah. There's a question about new frequencies, band splits for like,
Yeah, that's
for
a good
example,
one.
AT 3000 and 5000 series. Yes, they'll be added. If you need it in the interim, email support and we can send you a custom user definition.
And
As
then what's
well
that
as
email address for support?
Support@professionalwireless.com.
We can remember that.
Yeah.
Support at professionalwireless.com. That's one of the things I appreciate about how you guys work is, and I think that's essential in the market we're in. Reach out to people. So many times we will go, hey, you'll be out on show site or you'll know somebody and you'll go, hey, what are this? So many times the manufacturers are right there and the information you'll get is usually pretty accurate since they wrote the software or built the hardware. But that still, when we're in the heat of the battle, I was looking at Loren's. I just made a few notes that kept popping up, over and over that I saw. Number one is you did a great job of keeping things organized, right? I think in the heat of battle, you're going to get a frequency out to somebody, but you're always going to make sure that label is correct because that information does you no good if you don't know who you actually gave that out or the role it's playing, right? Because that's the worst thing is when you actually need to go to that person maybe and negotiate something to trade a frequency. You don't even know who you're going back to. So that was one of the things I noticed over and over. And we talked about that in like every single session. And that is documentation, 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 right? And that's, keeping your files, having those to go back to. Those are priceless in so many ways.
You got to get everybody's name and phone number that you deal with.
Name and phone number. There you go. I mean, that's, not to mention you got a good network of people then, because, everybody goes, well, I don't know who's going to be on this show. Well, Gary, pretty much, I can guarantee you that you're seeing a lot of the same folks game to game to game to game, right?
Yeah,
And you can do a lot of work. Now, we can argue about later whether you should get compensated for the pre-pro and all that kind of stuff. But if it's keeping you up at night, there's a good chance that you could probably get a lot of information that you need and want if you're staying awake over fretting over it. And that's what your list of people do. Another thing I got here, you are only as good as your data, period. Right? We got the FCC, right? But we got scans and we got more scans and we have more scans, right? And I heard better to go in with at least your FCC database, even if hey, we know that right now we're in the midst with all this repack and everything going on. Everybody might say, well, I'm not sure that I trust this or that. Well, you know what? Any port in a storm, right? Great start. And then scans, good, old, new. Take something to at least start your process, right? And then you get your new ones. And then finally, this has nothing to do with any of your presentation, but the handouts are available if you want them in the handout section. We'll put it on the website because there was a lot of great steps you had there if people wanted to try and recreate that. Because I was thinking about all the applications I could replace this ENG with this microphone, and you could run so many different scenarios that this works in. So Wednesday, April 15th is Lunch with Pete, scans from around the world.
And I will also be using IAS on that show.
Exactly.
But the collection of scans is always a little problematic because every piece of equipment does a scan in a different language. It's not all usable by every scan. So we'll be looking at how to take your scan from your Shure equipment and load it into IAS and vice versa.
Right. And so, if we got a little time, I'm going to ask Cody and Gary, and Loren, if you got nothing going on Wednesday and you want to, I'll buy you lunch, meaning you'll make your lunch there and eat it while we're talking. But we'd love to have you on there. Maybe after Pete's done with his stuff, maybe we'll pick up some more questions, because inevitably people start thinking about this over the next couple of days and the use scenario. So add those up, folks. Sign up for lunch with Pete, and we'll do some pickups on questions at that time.
Yeah, if we didn't get to
Meanwhile,
your question, feel free to email it to support@professional wireless, or yeah, come on by on Wednesday, and if we're lurking on that webinar, we're happy to answer whatever we can.
There we go.
and I will promise you,
have
we're
a-
just
I
going
have
to
a-
make up an answer either way. I mean, Pete's there, so
I
you know.
have a list of these questions, so don't try to ask these questions again on Wednesday. I won't
Oh,
allow it.
that's right. That's right.
It's already
Go
been asked.
check all
and
those out
forget
again.
about it.
Oh, exactly. So anyhow, thank you, folks. Go enjoy your dinner. Chill out, relax. You know, don't work too hard. Okay. Wake up tomorrow morning, ready for another great day of work. And tomorrow for us, boys, we'll be talking to our friends at Riedel and Artist and Bolero scaling up. So I got to do a little homework tonight. And meanwhile, you guys all have a good night, and we'll talk to you on the next one. So long.
Good night.
Good
Thanks,
night.
guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Right.